Hello and welcome to The Base. Now, last week we did a video of the 10 best books of all time. And we thought, as we are actors, writers, directors, theatre makers, we thought we really should do the 10 best plays of all time. So Morgan and I have had a think and we've selected our list. These lists are designed to provoke. So if you violently disagree, please let us know. We're going to go straight in, and we've broadly done them in chronological order. And of course, we're starting with the ancient Greeks, and we're going for a trilogy of plays, but they're normally known as one thing. This is the Oresteia by Aeschylus. And we actually, Morgan and I just finished reading these three plays. We're reading through all the Greek plays in order. And we've just finished doing the Oresteia. It's made up of Agamemnon, the libation bearers, and the Eumenides. And it follows a simple kind of chain of revenge. During the end of the Trojan War, before the play starts, Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter, Iphigenia, his and Clytemnestra's daughter. He comes back, he gets a hero's welcome, but Clytemnestra is extremely angry about him having sacrificed their daughter. So in the first place, she kills him in the bath. A few years later, in the second play, Orestes, their son, murders Clytemnestra as revenge for killing his dad. And in the Eumenides, we've had these figures called the Furies, who are like these witch-like primal beings, and they're pursuing Orestes for the sin of having killed his mother. And there follows a weird kind of courtroom drama between the gods as they try to work out whether Orestes should be pardoned. And they have a vote, and we see this kind of transition from the old gods to the Olympian gods. But it's an extraordinary trilogy of plays, and we were completely blown away when we read them aloud, weren't we, Morgan?
Yeah. They're incredible. I think Oedipus Rex would be the other big one you might think of, or the Bacchae by Euripides. But we had to obviously include a play from this era. I'd encourage actors and writers and anyone to study these plays and to read them, read them out loud with your friends. They are foundational texts for, I keep saying this in our podcast, foundational texts, but they really are. And I would also say, like, try to seek out a good translation. Try and find, I tend to like be slightly untrusting towards any translations after like the 1950s. I've kind of become like that because, I mean, there are some good ones, right? But lots of those people, lots of the education system before the 1950s was different, I think. And so people were really studied in Greek and the classics in a way that I think a lot of people post 1950 weren't as commonly. So anyway, that would be my advice, is seek out something a bit more classical. There are some really interesting translations. And yeah, they're so amazing, these plays, because they kind of mix the world of mortals and of gods. And it's like the highest drama you could imagine. And I love Aeschylus. I think Aeschylus is just a brilliant character. He's kind of like the big daddy of playwriting. He's like feels like the first playwright, really, doesn't he? And he's also a sort of warrior kind of playwright. It's like a sort of poet soldier, isn't he? And he says that he wants on his gravestone, he says he wants to be remembered as a soldier first, then a playwright second. And I don't think many playwrights could say that now, could they? There's some interesting characters out there, probably in America, but yeah, Aeschylus is very tough. His brother died in the Persian War, and his first play the first play we have of his is Persians, which is widely thought of as kind of the first play of all time. And that's also a fantastic play. I think that was the Michael Billington's favorite play of all time. I remember seeing it.
Yeah, but that number one.
Yeah, no, we read that not long ago, and it's very good as well. So, but yeah, it's great, and the characters Orestes and Electra are great, and brother and sister, a really lovely kind of quite a moving relationship between the two of them in the second piece, the libation bearers, which I think is my favorite out of the three.
Libation Bearers kind of comes alive in a very dramatic way. You've got these amazing scenes where, well, like the climax, when Orestes is literally like facing off with his mother. She's begging for her life. They're debating whether he has the right to kill her. You know, he's got a sword out and he's about to kill her. It's like absolute high drama. And there's so many moments that are actually very visual in the play. You can, as you're reading it, you can see how they kind of should be staged. I remember the bits in Agamemnon, the first play, where you can just see the staging of it. You can see the chorus in the corner. You can see Clytemnestra kind of standing, looking out, watching for news of the Trojan War.
I think sometimes the chorus, because I find the choruses sometimes quite hard to know what exactly how I should think of them dramatically, and I know people have debated that, and there's all sorts of opinions on it. But one of the things I find with the chorus, there it's almost like they are providing this sort of cinematic experience for the theatre, for the audience. So they describe to you in sort of HD what's happened in these wars. And so you have these long passages, and sometimes I think they can probably be potentially tedious to the modern reader. But if you try and imagine that they are conjuring these images in the minds of people who don't have screens and don't have phones, obviously, and yes, so very sort of cinematic descriptions of the events. And I thought it was kind of interesting as well in the Rest is History podcast I was listening to the other day. They mention that Plato was watching these plays, and I thought that was just a really wonderful thought, was that, you know, these plays are being watched by the great kind of thinkers who will go on to shape thought for the next 1,000, 2,000 years. And yeah, just loved it. I love the idea of thinking of Plato in the audience watching
Yeah.
the Bacchae or something, you know. So it's just a very cool period of history to geek out on, and we obviously had to start there. So yeah.
Um,
And shall we move on to number two?
yes.
So, because we should probably get a little pace on as we go,
Yeah.
we have Hamlet as number two. Now, we did include this on our essential reading list for fiction, but I don't think you can do top 10 plays of all time podcast without including Hamlet. So, yes, we put Hamlet on there. Ollie, is there anything you'd like to expand upon from the last conversation on Hamlet?
I mean, we could do 10 best plays ever, and they could all be Shakespeare. But Morgan was very strict with me about only including one Shakespeare. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe I would have included King Lear or Macbeth or something like that. But I think you're right. Without Hamlet, it would feel empty. I recently reread Hamlet because I'd found this old essay about Hamlet, which it's called "Did the King See the Dumb Show?" It made me realize how radical a play Hamlet actually is. I'm sure you know the story. Hamlet's father has been murdered by his uncle, and the ghost of Hamlet's father comes back and says, "You have to avenge my murder." Kind of very similar to the Orestes in the Libation Bearers, similar plot, right? But this essay, and when I was rereading Hamlet, I was seeing all these weird kind of inconsistencies. It's like Shakespeare has deliberately put in some legitimate reasons to doubt that the ghost is telling the truth. And I think that's part of the reason why it's such a fascinating play, is it seems to have this like multipolar sort of perspective on it. I mean, we're with Hamlet, but we get occasional glimpses of other people's point of view, and that's why it's so interesting for philosophers because it does have this kind of radical ambiguity at the heart of it. We don't really know what's real, and Hamlet himself doesn't know what's real, and is trying to work it out.
There's the Kenneth Branagh film version where he's sort of in a sort of, there's mirrors everywhere. He's in this house and there's mirrors everywhere. Because there is this slightly weird thing in Hamlet where you're not quite sure, he's not quite sure if he's being watched, when he's being watched, how much he's acting out. Even the to be or not to be speech, you know, sometimes I read that and I think, does he know that he's being watched? I know some people probably like, no, he doesn't, but you know, it's hard to know with Hamlet how much of it is kind of how much of his madness is feigned, or how much of it is authentic. And I think that line is very interesting. We talked last time about Don Quixote and kind of the fantasist kind of
Mm.
fantasizing himself into actually being the thing. So these lines are very interesting. Yeah, there's a really interesting line between Orestes and Hamlet, and very different character. Orestes struck me in a very different way, and Orestes does seem to love his father and does seem to be incredibly emotional and will kill his mother in vengeance for his father's death. Whereas with Hamlet, that's an interesting subject: is how much does Hamlet love his dad? I know that in the Richard Burton and the Richard Burton production with John Gielgud directing, which was recently, there was a drama or a play on at the National called The Motive and the Cue with Johnny Flynn and Mark Gatiss, and it was about the relationship between Gielgud and Burton. And the title of the play comes from the speech in one of the speeches in Hamlet, the motive. What would he do had he the motive and cue for passion that I have? In which Hamlet is talking about an actor who's more convincing at acting than he is at life. And the big question they were wrestling with, or Richard Burton was wrestling with, was, does Hamlet love his father? And that was their big breakthrough, that they decided that he doesn't actually, and that's why he can't quite do this, is because he doesn't love his father. Personally, I don't actually buy that. I I don't buy that. But this play is just extraordinary. I saw an actor, quite a famous actor recently, taking shots at Shakespeare online, and this the guy's an idiot. Like, I'm just going to say it. The guy is an absolute idiot, right? He was saying like Shakespeare doesn't write good plots. It's crap. This is sacrilegious. Shakespeare, Shakespeare is the greatest writer of all time, and everyone should be worshipping him all the time, right? Yeah, some of his plots are complicated, some of them aren't as good as others, but like Hamlet is full of the most amazing themes, the most amazing plot, and the most profound philosophical exploration, scene to scene. And yeah, it takes incredible study. And it's hard to know. As I said in the last podcast, it's like we're jumping from one bit and you find another bit and you go, wow, this whole bit is like, I've never even thought about this bit. What's going on here? But it's like the Mona Lisa, which is what T.S. Eliot said, didn't he? It's the Mona Lisa of theatre. And that's why I was very pushy with Ollie and said, like, I know we could put some other ones in there, but I think we should, this has to
You
be.
know what used to piss me off? Uh,
What's that?
when I was at university, there was such a fashion, and it was always the sort of, I know we mentioned him before, the Ricky Gervais atheist Dawkins kind of crowd, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They would slag off Shakespeare's plots, particularly the later romances like The Winter's Tale and The Tempest. They have some quite big magical leaps. It goes into this sort of magical realist territory, and it would just be so sort of teenagerly fashionable to slag them off and say they're completely ridiculous and they don't know what Shakespeare was like smoking at the time or whatever. And I really hate it because, you know, theatre is supposed to be a provocation and a place of speculation where you are invited to believe these things and to run with these big leaps that people make and to go with them, you know. And I just hate that very reductive, very limited way of thinking about great art. It's really annoying. There was also a fashion like after Shakespeare. I mean, after university, I remember I had several friends who we studied together. We were cramming for our finals in third year in the library, poring over Shakespeare, talking about how brilliant he was. Then a few of them went off and did MAs in Shakespeare studies at King's College. And I met up with them a few weeks in, and they were saying, "Yeah, we're actually looking at how Shakespeare is not that great, and it's only because we have a very Western centric view that we think Shakespeare is great, and actually, globally, he's not the greatest writer." And it would just annoy me so
True.
much.
Just not true.
And we're sort of fighting against that. We're sort of fighting the Harold Bloom kind of fight against that kind of revisionist look at
Yeah.
Shakespeare. After revisionist comes restoration, and that's
We're like the Puritans, the puritanical restorationists. Yeah, I saw I think it's worth, if we're going to keep firing a few shots here, I think like the silliness of the sort of silliness they've made, like you see these shows on TV and they're just sort of, it's all silly. It's all, they've just made everything about like Shakespeare just silly.
Mm.
You know, it's a bit like the Monty Python stuff. It's like, obviously some of it's funny, but it's a little bit just like mockery of the past. It's just this sort of absolute mockery of it all. Like all of this is just absurd. And aren't these
Yeah.
people stupid? No, they're not stupid. You know, no, we have to like re-enchant the world with drama and narrative and myth, because it's ultimately left everyone empty. And it's like really dangerous vital stuff. Like Romeo and Juliet is seen as this sort of camp love story. You know, that's a violent, crazy, like dangerous story. That's like honor killing in the modern world. That's like a strict Islamic family saying, if you marry my daughter, I'm going to kill you. Modern Westerners don't understand. Like this stuff is serious. Like, you know, so we should treat it as such. And I think that will make it more exciting to people to study and to perform in. So yes, that's our rant there. Let's see if there's any more that happen as we.
I would just sum up the rant just with two words. It's the ironization, what you were saying. We are scared of, Howard Barker said this in our interview with him as well. Modern people are very fearful of emotions, so we ironize everything.
Right.
And also literalism. We take everything very literally, and so we aren't prepared to be enchanted.
Yeah. Perfect. Right. Number 3, Ollie.
Yeah, so next on the list, got a play that comes just after Shakespeare by a writer called Thomas Middleton, who would have been sort of a contemporary of Shakespeare. But this falls into the category of that's known as Jacobean plays or Jacobean tragedies. Very powerful period of drama that comes just after Shakespeare. There's some very, very bloody, very violent dramatists like Webster, the White Devil, and things like that. Really, they do almost reach the heights of Shakespeare. But this one, personal favorite of mine, is called The Changeling by Thomas Middleton. The main thrust of the plot, it's about this woman, Beatrice Joanna. She is in love with a guy, but she's been betrothed to marry somebody else. She enlists the help of this deformed servant who's in love with her, called De Flores, to help her by getting rid of the person that she's in a kind of arranged marriage with. I mean, the plot's quite simple and not particularly remarkable, but it has some amazing passages, particularly from De Flores, this really ugly, deformed character who has a kind of poetic soul. And it all ends in, mass murder, basically, and blood everywhere. But it's a perfect example of Jacobean tragedy, a lot of violence, a lot of sex, and poetry that almost reaches the heights of Shakespeare. So I think that deserves a place as representative of this very, very luminous period of Jacobean tragedy.
Yeah. I think it's only right that we put this on the list, and you were very keen to have it on there. So I submitted in this situation. Should we move on to number 4?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 4, we jump forward about 180 years, and it's a play called Faust by Goethe. And Faust, let's say Faust Part 1. It's in 2 parts. Me and Ollie know Part 1 very well because we performed it with the bass was it last year? Maybe it was the year before. It was still last year, wasn't it? It was
I think it was March 24.
2024. So March 24, we performed it in St. Bart's Church. So we studied it a lot. And we also did a podcast recently with Johannes Niederhauser on it, which was a very illuminating discussion. So yeah, it's more of it can be seen as like a poem. It can be seen as like a huge sort of poem that you're supposed to study intellectually rather than necessarily it working as a piece of drama. I do think it does work as a piece of drama, although it's incredibly long. And Goethe is revered by many as one of the great thinkers of history. He's kind of seen, from what I understand, as slightly like forgotten and criminally forgotten character in history. And people rank him up there with Nietzsche, with the great sort of prominent thinkers in history. And so it's kind of amazing that we have a play from one of those characters that is as good as his kind of thinking and his ideas elsewhere. And he writes novels as well. He writes kind of these amazing scientific books on his theories on light and all sorts of stuff. I read one of them. It's very, very difficult to understand, to be honest, way above my IQ, I'd say probably. But but what's kind of cool is that this character has this amazing play that we can put on our list, whereas some of these other philosophers or great figures have tried to write plays and it hasn't quite come off. But this is one of the most important dramatic pieces in human history. So yes, it definitely has to be on this list. And I think I'm very glad that in our small way we brought it back into the kind of dramatic consciousness.
Yeah, we've been a small part of the rehabilitation of Faust. I think you're right. I mean, it's very, very rare. There's one other on our list, but it's very rare that a major thinker also is a great artistic writer. We have no idea really what Shakespeare thought. We have no idea what Middleton thought. We had no idea at all what Aeschylus or Sophocles or Euripides thought, right? And it seems to be that these things don't go together. We tried to read a play that Marx wrote, which was probably one of the worst things that we've ever read.
It's probably
Literally like the first
the
act,
worst play I've ever
completely
read.
terrible. So it's very, very rare that a great intellect, a great philosopher, is also adept as a dramatic artist, because a very, very, very different skill. Thinking is a kind of more reflexive thing. Dramatic writing has to be very front-footed about action. So it's a real historical and literary rarity, this, that a figure as learned and great and someone who's respected, as a romantic, part of that early German romanticism, has written this great, again, bewildering, a bit like Hamlet, very mysterious, very ambiguous. We've explored some of this with Johannes and with Sebastian Milbank, who gave the response in St. Bart's after the performance. So many different angles you can look at it from. Faust does this deal with the devil in order to expand the limits of human knowledge. In a nutshell, I'd say we had Sebastian arguing that, from a kind of Christian perspective, that was the wrong thing to do, and he should have accepted his place in the cosmic order. And Johannes was arguing that actually that was a good thing that Faust made the bargain with the devil, because it actually accelerates human development, human consciousness. And in order to keep striving, humans actually need the devil. So it's an amazingly wide text that it can encompass both of those radically different interpretations.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not to be mistaken with Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe, which is a couple of 100 years before, and it's from the same mythological figure, which is this kind of Dr. Faust, is a German kind of doctor figure from the 1500s. So, but yes, it's similar, but very different from my reading of them both. Yes, I think if we were to go into the big Faust discussion now, we'd be here for a long time. So
Yeah.
if you are keen on learning more about this play, then we'd encourage you to check out our discussions with Sebastian Milbank and Johannes and see what you think. As much as I loved Johannes's kind of interpretation, my instinctive reaction was to more towards Sebastian's position, but then that might be, I'm sure it's a bias of my own, probably wanting that to be what the play's about. And that's interesting for us all, isn't it? And there's Faust Part 2, which we may well explore with the bass next year, which is a complete wild, crazy adventure which includes Helen of Troy. So, but yeah, that's Faust Part 1. So that comes in at our list at number 4. So now we'll jump forward about 100 years to let's say the most important naturalistic writer in history, Anton Chekhov. And we have chosen The Seagull as the play. It's really hard to choose between any of these plays, really. People like them all for different reasons. We also have a massive podcast on the life and times of Anton Chekhov, which is 2 parts. with Professor Donald Rayfield, who is kind of the most famous living biographer. So if you did want to sort of study Chekhov more, that's a good pod to listen to. And we learned a lot doing that. But yeah, we've chosen the Seagull. Ollie, do you want to say why we've chosen the Seagull, or do you want me to say it?
Um, you say why we've chosen the Seagull specifically.
Yeah, because I feel like it might not be your favorite.
It's not my favorite. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah. So I feel a bit bad. You've got one coming up. Okay. So I love the Seagull because I just think it's like, I think it's perfect drama. It's so good to teach the Seagull. I've taught it in quite a few places and worked with actors on it. And I think like it's so rich and simple and moving and funny. And the storyline, well, there's links with Hamlet again here. You know, there's links with the kind of protagonist of the play is this young, precocious, kind of incredible writer called Constantine, and he is in love with this girl called Nina, and he has written a play in which he will put on in front of his family, his mum and her new lover, and Nina, his love, will act in the play. Now, Constantine is almost like a proto kind of revolutionary in some ways. He's this young writer who thinks we need to get rid of all the old ways, these stuffy old ways, and we need new forms and new ideas. And so in his play is that. So there's a play within a play in this play. And he has a very strange relationship with his mum. His father is absent, which I always find very interesting as well. And his mum brings home this famous writer called Trigorin, and Constantine is, I won't say, I don't think he's necessarily jealous of Trigorin. I think instinctively Constantine does know that he is actually of more quality than Trigorin creatively, artistically. That's what I think anyway. But Trigorin's famous and well known, and he's very attractive. He seems to be a real hit with the ladies. And he's younger. Interestingly, he's younger than Constantine's mum. And now they turn up to watch the play, and then Nina falls in love with this older writer. And so his mum and his girlfriend, or the girl he loves at least, have both fallen in love with the same man. And it's a tragedy, really. The play is a tragedy because Constantine will kill himself by the end of the play. And there's just so much in it. There's so much richness in it. And I think this is a period of history where you have the birth of naturalism. And so you get Ibsen, Henrik Ibsen, and August Strindberg beginning to write plays that sound like people talking. You know, they start to, because Ibsen's plays change, don't they? At some point, he starts writing naturalistic plays, and they're all trying to do this. They're all kind of getting in on it at the time. They're writing letters to each other, and even Nietzsche's involved. Nietzsche's reading Strindberg, and there's a great kind of fascinating period. And Chekhov kind of emerges from being a short story writer, and in the late 1880s, 1890s, Chekhov starts staging some of his plays, and then he is widely known as the kind of the best naturalistic playwright of all time, and he's foundational for actor study. And he will form a relationship with Konstantin Stanislavski, so he's perfectly partnered for actors and training. But yeah, so that's
Be interesting.
the Seagull.
Yeah, that's great. It would be interesting if you were like an alien and you came down to Earth and you had our list and you read these plays. They were your only guide to theatre. God help you. I think everything would be kind of in a continuum until this point. You would be able to see how Hamlet and Oresteia and Faust, you know, it's clearly there's a main character. There's quite strong plots running through it. The Seagull is quite a radical departure from that. You have a real ensemble piece. Yes, there are main characters, but you know, there's lots of. I think there's 4 different acts. So they're all kind of in real time, right? Each
No, there's a 2-year gap between acts.
But the actual acts run in real time. Those each act.
Yeah, sorry, the acts run in real time. Yeah, they do. Yeah,
which is quite radical to do that. Maybe the Greeks did that a little bit, but I think there is a very, very significant change in the history of theatre here, as you say, kind of set up and introduced by Ibsen and Strindberg, but taken much further. by Chekhov, who were like reacting to the star system that existed in Russian theatre. These true ensemble pieces, real slices of life, kind of downbeat, kind of melancholy flavor to them. Not much like high drama of people sort of murdering each other. Real slice of life naturalism. Um, Actually saw a production recently of The Seagull at the Barbican. Thomas Ostermeyer, famous, probably the biggest European director at the moment, with Kate Blanchett as the mother, and it was good. It was good. Again, they kind of made it a bit silly, like most productions of everything kind of do, but they caught the flavor of the tragi comedy. And another little anecdote that I remember seeing this play years and years ago, 10 years ago, and an ex-partner of mine was in it. And outside, it's a name drop, but it was chatting with Simon Stevens, a modern playwright. And I remember he said, the Seagull is great, particularly for writers, because every writer thinks that they're Constantine, as in a real trailblazer, a real like radical, pushing against the form, trying new things, a true artist. He said, but actually, in reality, we writers are Trigorin, which is womanizers, hacks, just like,
Yeah.
which is an interesting
And
revelation.
Trigorin recognizes that about himself.
Yes.
He sort of, and as the play goes on, this kind of awful, tragic thing happens that Constantine becomes much more renowned than Trigorin. So by Act 4, he is this renowned writer, but Nina's ran off and had a baby that's died with Trigorin and still doesn't love Constantine. And it's terrible. I think there are really interesting parallels between, Hamlet and Constantine. Him and his mum, Arkadina, one of the great female characters in theatre history, in my opinion. They have these back and forths where they speak the lines of Hamlet and Gertrude. So it's very kind of on the nose. But there is a Latin term, the puer eternus. Okay, I don't know. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it's eternal boy, and people use it. It's like Jung or Nietzsche, I can't remember, uses it to describe a sort of a kind of archetype in drama. And Constantine is very much this. So, yes, I think that is good for The Seagull.
Yeah.
Our next play, number 6 on our list, is No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre. So, Ollie, I'll let you take the lead on this one.
So this is the other rarity that I was referring to, a great philosopher that happens to have written a great play. Lots of Sartre's plays are good. He wrote quite a few, but this is the clearest, the best. We have a whole discussion with the philosopher Nina Power, who's an expert in existentialism, which was Sartre's philosophy, about No Exit. So for a full deep dive, I would very much suggest that people look at that. We performed it. It was one of our earliest performances, I think, in December 2023, and it was a very, very good performance. It's mostly just a three-hander, and these three characters essentially find themselves in hell. And Sartre's version of hell is a room that you kind of can't seem to leave, and you're trapped with these other people who are not horrible, but you're trapped with their versions of you. Like the characters are involved in a kind of struggle to prove to the other person that they are who they want themselves to be, if you see what I mean. So it kind of ties into Sartre's ideas about authenticity and who we are, but I won't get like fully into that. But it really works as a piece of drama. It kind of points towards Harold Pinter's work, and in fact, there's a very good version on YouTube with Harold Pinter playing the male character in it, which people should check out. I think it's an old BBC filmed play. It's a great piece of drama, cracking piece of drama.
Yeah, it's a really amazing play. I think it's a real actor's piece as well.
Mm.
He
Mm.
wrote this he wanted Albert Camus to play Garçon, didn't he?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
And I don't know did he play it in the 50s or
Can't remember.
anyway, it was and it's written in 1944. It's like during the war, isn't it, when he
Mm.
writes this play? So it's obviously a very interesting period of history, but it's a real actor's piece. And I always say to young actresses, that to look at Estelle, because she has these extraordinary monologues in which she's kind of
Yeah.
looking back into, because they always have these moments, don't they, where they're looking onto the earth and seeing the people there, and then back in the room, and they're just brilliant monologues for actors, just absolutely brilliant. And then the two actresses and the actor we had for our production were incredible actors, and it's just a brilliant, brilliant play. It's like a perfect length, three-hander, really easy to stage. I'm surprised it isn't done all the time,
Yeah.
because I mean, I feel like we shouldn't even mention it, because people are going to someone's going to put it on unless we do a proper full-fledged production, which we should do.
We
But
should. Yeah, we
you
should.
shouldn't even be mentioning this, because some sneaky
It's a
bastards will be
perfect
listening.
lesson in how to explore ideas in plays.
Yeah.
It can be quite difficult to explore philosophical ideas in plays.
Oh, incredibly difficult. I think
Yeah.
it's very hard. I'm like working on something at the moment, and I'm like, no, Morgan, that's you trying to sound clever. It's not, it's not acting.
It's so hard. It's so hard. If you are philosophically minded, as we are, but also dramatically minded, to marry the two is a real it's really hard.
Yeah, it's really hard, and because they are, this the problem is that humans are philosophical, and like, we do say we are sort of parodies of ourselves, and so, but yeah, this play just has so much in it. So, yes, No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre is a very special play, so we'd highly recommend that. Ollie, number 7.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite plays of all time. It's called The Visit by a Swiss writer called Duran Mart. It's kind of a modern Greek tragedy. I think that's the best way to think of it. Broadly speaking, the plot is about a really kind of socially deprived town, right, where everyone's unemployed, everyone's kind of screwed. And this woman who is from the town, she returns one day and she's now a like multi millionaire. And she comes and she says to the town, look, I will give you millions and millions and I will help you. I will save the town for you. This is my old hometown. I love it. I will save the town for you. But you all have to agree to kill that old man because he raped me when we were teenagers. And the old man is like this lovely old man that everyone loves in the town. So the town is then faced with this dilemma: kill this man who they love or be poor forever. And that sets out this, it's a great setup, right? Wonderfully dramatic, on the level of like Greek tragedy dilemma for this town to try and work out. And it plays brilliantly. It's quite big stylistically, like the character's quite big. Particularly the woman, I can't remember her name, but it's a very famous character, often performed in like big fur coats. And I think she's got these two like slaves that she carries around with her. Yeah, I would thoroughly recommend anyone checking it out who doesn't know it. It is one of the great plays of the 20th century.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, we have made a slightly naughty mistake here, because our next play is actually 1 year after The Visit. So we have chosen A View from the Bridge by Arthur Miller from 1955. And yeah, we felt that we had to have an American play on the list. It's hard to choose with the Americans, really, because they've been so dominant in theatre from the sort of 50s onwards, 40s, 50s onwards, I suppose, really. You had this incredible movement of teachers and thinkers and theatre makers and directors from the 30s onwards, with Stella Adler and Harold Kluman and Lee Strasberg, and then Sanford Meisner, and then Uta Hagen, and they all take Stanislavski's ideas and kind of use them in America and build their own systems. And those systems they build are basically the acting systems that have made film and movies, for movies and TV for the last 70 years. That sort of the techniques that they taught are the kind of technique, the acting techniques, really, particularly of the golden American eras of film, which lots of people grew up on. I know it's slightly changed now, but certainly at one point it was that, if you wanted to be an actor, you went and watched Robert De Niro or Meryl Streep or Al Pacino or Denzel Washington or whoever it would be, right? You'd go and watch these kind of great actors, and they all came from this tradition. Anyway, so there are many great American playwrights that emerge we have Eugene O'Neill, who's kind of prior to this, and you have Tennessee Williams. Tennessee Williams is also a great writer, and we could have picked a Tennessee Williams play easily, actually. But we went for Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge. A View from the Bridge is about Eddie Carbone and his family, and he is kind of obsessed with his wife's niece, and his wife's cousin comes and visits, and Eddie Carbone really struggles with the kind of romantic relationship developing between this young girl and Rodolfo, this Italian stallion who's turned up basically. And it's yeah, it's an amazing play. It's quite a grand kind of piece. You've got Alfieri, is it Alfieri coming out and doing the kind of he's it's almost like a Greek chorus kind of type character.
The
He comes out,
narrator.
talks to the audience, and kind of does a prologue and an epilogue. So yeah, it's grand, it's huge. I saw Mark Strong played Eddie Carbone, and it's kind of like men being overcome by their passions and their sort of weird fantasies, and also this sort of idea of like being being dragged through the streets, the shame of someone taking your name and kind of besmirching it and publicly, and I think it's just very. I always remember the sense that Eddie Carbone can't get his name back. His name's in tatters. His name is in the gutter, and yeah, it's a great play, and there's much more we could say about it, but I think it kind of stands as a real strong American play for us to have selected.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes a lot from the Greeks, as quite a lot of these plays do. There's definitely like a through line there with high tragic drama. I saw that Mark Strong production as well, which is very good. And I just remember that wonderful scene. It's got these good, great moments of like male rivalry. It's got these great moments like male rivalry, particularly with the older man and the younger Rodolfo. And there's a bit where they're competing about like picking up a chair by the very bottom,
Yes,
right? And
great
they're
scene.
lifting it as high as they can. It's just this real like primal man on man, which makes for great drama.
Yeah. It really does. So, yeah, we put A View from the Bridge. It's really hard to choose in this period. I really like the plays of Sam Shepard as well. I used to love reading them.
Oh yeah, true
Yeah, they
West.
were great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a real golden age of American writing, which feeds in with the film industry as well, as you say. Like you have figures like Elia Kazan, who directed On the Waterfront, a lot of big films, was also directing some of Miller, lots of Tennessee Williams. As you say, a real like ferment of luminaries who are breaking new ground in naturalism, but also having an element of Greek tragedy and also an element of poetic um, poetic dimensions, as lots of Tennessee Williams work has.
Yeah, and then August Wilson's an interesting writer as well. There's some really amazing American playwrights, so we've chosen this one out of
Mm.
many. The the next play we've chosen, we come back to Blighty, is Saved by Edward Bond. And Saved was written in, I think it was 1966 originally. I'm just gonna double check that. We had an assistant, we'd ask him to pull it up on him or her to pull it up on the screen. 65, yeah, 1965.
Mm.
And so yeah, Saved by Edward Bond. I was in a revival of Saved in London probably about 12 years ago now. And yeah, I sort of fought with Ollie, and to get this play on the list. I think it's a really fascinating play. I read it recently, or I read some of it recently, and it really struck me as a brilliant piece. Edward Bond sadly passed away last year, yeah, and he was a fascinating figure, and I met him and spent quite a lot of time with him in rehearsals, and I really liked him, and I've got a nice thing over there on the wall from him actually, and I sent him the character's jacket after I finished the play, and then he sent me in the post a big bag turned up one day, big massive bag, and I opened up this bag and there was just tons of sweets in there, packets of sweets, and I was sort of rummaging about thinking, who the hell has sent me these like tons of packets of sweets? And then I found there was a note right in the middle of it, and it said, for Morgan, because every good boy deserves sweets. Uh, which is quite, these cool, great writers, they always seem to do things that are the act of that they're creative in their acts, aren't they? They kind of,
Yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah.
these kind of great moments. And that was my little moment in history with Edward Bond. It's like I received a huge bag of sweets. And I played Len, the title role, and it's like an epic tragedy, sprawling tragedy written in very specific dialect. So Cockney actors will enjoy it. It's hard for people who aren't Cockney to understand it. I'm not a natural Cockney, but grew up in London, so I know the accent well. But it's like a period Cockney. It's like the '60s Cockney, and it starts with Len, the sort of the main character, kind of coming home with this girl Pam, and they sort of like are almost like having sex on stage, but it's never quite clear what they're doing. And he weirdly moves in with this family, but she never really takes to him, and he's kind of in love with her, and she is in love with this awful character called Fred, played by Callum Callahan in the production I did. And Callum's a friend of mine, but I have to say, I have to give Callum a shout out on the podcast. It was one of Callum was it was one of the best performances I've ever seen on stage. And Callum is a very sweet guy. He is genuinely frightening on stage when he played this role. And I don't find people frightening really, particularly actors. Not trying to be a tough guy, but I don't. But I used to be on stage. I used to be on stage with Callum and go, "Wow, this guy is actually kind of scary." And maybe that and he's like the nicest guy you could meet, Callum. But yes, anyway, so she's in love with this guy, Fred, and it's this sort of they end up this awful moment happens in the play where Fred and his mates, who are these kind of useless kind of young men who don't know what to do with themselves, they end up stoning a baby to death. And this is the famous scene in the play, and the play was banned because of this. And it kind of kicked off big discussions about censorship. And Laurence Olivier wrote a letter saying, you have to put this on, this is really important. Edward Bond would argue that this was a sort of metaphorical moment when he argued that when they're stoning the baby to death, they're stoning themselves. And he was a very deep character, Edward Bond, and he had a real, I think, a genuine love for the working class, and I think that's rare for playwrights. And I think, and I don't mean that like I don't. A lot of these sort of so-called left-wing people, they don't really like working class people. They just don't, right? But Edward Bond did seem to have this kind of deep love for these people, and yeah. So the play is like a sort of epic working class kind of drama, and it's very dark and it's long. It's long and it's about 3.5 hours. And yeah, so that's my summary of Saved. Have you got any thoughts on
Yeah,
Saved?
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting moment. It's interesting making these lists because you realize how long a period of time there was when British theatre was not very good. As in, we haven't picked any plays from the 18th and 19th century, or really from the second half of the 17th century in Britain. All these writers tried to write theatre, Wordsworth, Byron, all these people, and there's nothing that has really survived. It's a very mysterious moment. But post Shakespeare, you have the Jacobeans and you have the Restorations, which are a bit of a laugh sometimes. But then you have a couple of hundred years where theatre is just a very minor art. But then it kind of comes back at the end of the 19th century with Shaw and Wilde, Sange, and then the second half of the 20th century, you do have a kind of explosion with these other voices like Edward Bond, like working class voices coming into theatre. I would say Bond is another kind of great writer who's also a great thinker. He's a very, very interesting Marxist thinker. He writes these long essays as prefaces to a lot of his plays. I'd put Howard Barker in the mix as well as a great thinker. He's also a great writer. Actually, not long after you did Saved, I worked with Bond myself as well. I wasn't supposed to, but I was in a Bond play called The Fool, an interesting play about the poet John Clare. He came in to watch a rehearsal, I'd say like 2 weeks into the rehearsal process, was appalled by what he saw, fired the director, and immediately took over directing the play. Literally, like overnight, we got an email saying Edward Bond's directing the play now. He hated what he saw yesterday. And it was wonderful, again, this similar experience to you. I had a wonderful few weeks with Edward Bond, a
Yeah,
very,
I forgot
very
this.
lovely man. We used to get the tube back together, and I used to sort of try and have sort of intellectual chats with him. He wasn't really that interested, but I've had a lovely like poem from him, I think. And the last thing he said to me was just before the final night, and he looked at me and he said, "Good luck. Keep your nose clean." I got no idea what he meant.
Do you know what? I think he might have said that to me as well.
Maybe that's just his phrase.
Maybe that's his phrase. Yeah, he did. He had this funny habit of you'd be talking with him and he'd just get up and walk off. And he used to do it. They used to see him do it. He'd just be there with three people just chatting, and he just in the middle of just walks off. And he said to me once, he said he liked doing it. He said to me, "Yeah, I find it quite liberating just to be able to get up and walk away." But yeah, I liked him as a man. He was a fascinating figure, and it's nice to put him on the list. It's difficult when we're doing this because once again, you're saying like all these. You're saying George Bernard Shaw, or even we forgot to talk about David Mamet. There are so many. There are so many playwrights we could talk about. So maybe, suggest some in the comments and get a discussion going. That would be very useful. And that's what we're kind of hoping to provoke.
Yeah.
So we will move on to number 10. And we have chosen Blasted by Sarah Kane. So Ollie, would you like to talk about Blasted? Or
Yes,
Sarah Kane?
I think Sarah Kane is a very significant writer. She died very young by suicide, as most people know. She only wrote maybe 5 plays. Blasted is her first play. Very aggressive movement of theatre. This is what becomes known as in-your-face theatre. Some other writers like Mark Ravenhill, maybe even Philip Ridley might be under that banner. But Kane was always sort of the most extreme, and her plays are very, very extreme, very violent, very cruel, but also very poetic and beautiful. She was obviously a very troubled person, had a lot of psychological issues, right? But she literally blasts onto the scene with Blasted, which is actually I remember an old teacher of ours, Lloyd Trott at RADA. He said he went to the first ever production of Blasted with the then principal of RADA, a guy called Hugh Crutwell, I think, and they had a massive argument after that show, Lloyd and Hugh Crutwell, because Lloyd quite liked it, and Hugh Crutwell was appalled and thought that nobody should like this, nobody should see any artistic value in this sort of grotesque stuff at all. So it was a real affront to maybe an older generation of theatre goers and people in the industry when it burst onto the scene it must be the early 90s, I think, Blasted, right?
1995.
No, mid-90s. So it really was a moment of energy where this new, very aggressive, very violent, in some ways almost like Tarantino-esque, but more poetic and sophisticated. But it's writers who have been influenced by that a little bit, and Martin McDonagh does this as well, really want to like put that extreme violence and extreme situations on stage.
Yeah, Martin McDonagh's a good one.
Yeah.
We could have put one of his plays on the list as well. An amazing modern writer, very nice man too, actually. So I think it's good. We wanted to just put something relatively modern at the end here and finish with this. And I think this play, I've seen it twice. I've seen it once at the Lyric Hammersmith. It was on the year before I did Saved, actually, and that was a good production. But the best production of it I ever saw was a German one at the Barbican, and it was in subtitled German play. So you had the sort of, it was kind of weird because they had I hadn't seen a play with subtitles before, so you had the kind of on some sort of digital bar across the stage, and it was kind of easy to follow actually. But it just affected me so deeply, and it's a horrible piece, man. Like there's the stuff that's going on in it. It's just awful. He eats a baby in this one, so he's sort of one up on Saved, really, isn't it? They end up eating a baby. It's kind of grotesque, it's grotesque and it's troubling, but it takes you to that place, and the truth about war is that people do the most indescribably horrible things in war, and they do, and it's just really awful. And it just is, and you can't even bear to like follow it too much, because it's not just fighting on the front line, shooting a few of your enemies, taking ground. There's In war, you just have these mad stories of like people just raping families and like just doing the most hideous things. And this play kind of confronts you with that. And I think that is just powerful and provocative and brave. And we admire that, don't we, Ollie? And I think we are trying to bring back bravery to theatre again. Bring back, we've had an era of incredible censoriousness and cowardice, really, and it's difficult. People are terrified, but we have. And this play should inspire people out of that. If culture has been subverted in so many weird ways now. It's hard to even comment. But these writers, they had balls. Like they were taking on people. They were not afraid to like shock you and scare you. And I think she in this play inspired a really interesting era of playwrights. Lots of the playwrights we probably would have grown up reading or doing scenes from, or probably like audition pieces for drama schools. Lots of them would come from like the plays by like, Mark Ravenhill, Dennis Kelly, Philip Ridley, Simon Stevens. So it was an exciting era that followed on. Joe Penhall, I like Joe Penhall actually.
Yeah.
So
Sarah Kane actually hated Joe Penhall.
that
He wasn't writing.
You know what? Exactly. You know,
people can hate each other. That's okay. But you're completely right that this is like genuinely subversive, shocking stuff. It's not pretend subversive, which I'm afraid I think most of the theatre that we're surrounded by at the moment is mock subversive, pretend subversive, fake subversive, right? It's subverting a thing that doesn't even exist anyway, or isn't even there anymore anyway. But she's a really great. She's having a bit of a revival.
On the ground, isn't it?
What's that?
They say it's like kicking the dead man on the ground. He's already
well,
dead.
Sticking two fingers up at the ruins of a church that nobody's in anyway. It's an empty gesture.
You want to be a subversive, truly subversive, like go to church.
That's what Nick Cave says, right? What's the most subversive thing now? Be a conservative and go to church.
Yeah, well,
but just to finish on Kane, she's having a bit of a moment. She's having a bit of a revival, I've noticed, which is great. And a lot of younger writers, I think, are taking inspiration from her example, her very, very powerful example. I love the play Crave, which is just these sort of disembodied voices that coalesce together. She was a true like formal experimenter as well.
Yeah,
and I think it was what you were saying about war. Actually, that was it. I think Sarah Kane's a very good example. I had an argument recently with an old friend, and he was saying that he didn't think theatre had any value that didn't kind of offer hope, and I just don't accept this. I think it's very weak thinking that we need hope. I mean, I'm not against hope, and theatre can offer hope, right? And it can offer a kind of moral framework, but it's just a very shallow understanding of what theatre is. A theatre can really confront you with the uncomfortable things of what you were saying, like people do in war, of the things that we are that we don't like to admit. And Sarah Kane and other great writers, they don't sort of give us an easy, facile hope or an easy, facile, happy ending. They confront us with the problematic, contradictory, primal substance of humanity and what we're capable.
And hope for what? What? Hope for what? That everything's going to be all right. Don't worry. Everything's going to be all right. Don't be so pathetic. Really. Don't be so pathetic. That's not, why would you need the play to tell you that? Why would you need to go to theatre and be like, oh, they've told me that everything's going to be okay? Have some integrity. I've had the same argument with someone once in a bar. And, in the old days when I used to go to theatre bars and debate with people and discuss. Now we do it with you on this pod. But you shouldn't have to pull your hand through it. There are obviously sometimes, as you say, it's lovely to have some hope, and there is hope, and but there's all sorts of other stuff. So we don't need,
What,
that's not,
what they mean is that they are frightened and they want a simple, normally political message at the end to reassure them.
yeah, the kid,
Writing does not do that and never does that.
yeah, the
Ever.
kids are all right. The kids are going to do it once they'll, they'll take over and everything will be fine. No, it's on you. It's on you.
And,
Take some damn responsibility and go to church. Uh, well, yes. Okay. So there are 10 plays. So please remember to subscribe to our channel if you can, if you're listening. It really helps us grow this. It's growing well now, and we're having some lovely responses, and people are kind of entering into discussion with us. So yeah, please do subscribe to us. It really helps, and we appreciate it. And yeah, put your comments in there. We've got a play coming up, play written by me, so that's coming up on 30th of October. So if you're watching this or listening to this before then, it's the 30th of October 2025. So hope to see you there, and I'll put a link in for the tickets underneath the show. And yeah, follow us on all the socials and keep up to date with what we're doing, and let us know any ideas and thoughts you have about any of this. And there's a lot more to come from us. So yeah, thanks very much for listening, and we will see you soon.